I used to believe my life was predictable, maybe even enviable. A steady job, a beautiful home, and a husband who, at least to the outside world, looked like he adored me. But I should have known better. Nothing in my family has ever been as perfect as it seemed. It all started the night I found the emails. I wasn't snooping, not really. My husband, Daniel, had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, a habit that used to annoy me. That night, though, curiosity got the better of me. I was pouring a glass of wine when I noticed his inbox blinking with new messages. I shouldn't have looked. God, I wish I hadn't. The subject line read, "Wire transfer confirmation." My first thought was that Daniel was hiding some kind of investment from me. But as I scrolled, my heart sank. The emails weren't just about money. They were threaded with words like fraud, offshore accounts, shell corporations. And then I saw the name that made my blood run cold, Elena, my sister. Daniel and Elena had been working together behind my back, not just working, conspiring. The betrayal wasn't just marital. It was blood deep. My sister, my flesh and blood, had been funneling money with my husband in some elaborate scheme that I didn't fully understand. Millions of dollars were moving through their hands, and every email dripped with secrecy and complicity. I couldn't breathe. My fingers went numb as I scrolled faster and faster, my eyes devouring the ugly truth I was never supposed to see. And then, at the bottom of the thread, a single line that shattered me more than the rest. "She'll never know, not unless we want her to." I dropped the glass of wine. It shattered across the tile, crimson liquid spreading like blood. The noise must have startled Daniel upstairs, because within seconds, he appeared at the doorway, his expression softening into fake concern. "Tash? What happened?" I stared at him, the man I thought I knew, my mouth dry. "How long?" I whispered. He blinked, feigning confusion. "How long what?" I pointed to the laptop, my hands trembling. "Don't you dare play dumb with me, Daniel. How long have you and Elena been doing this?" For a moment, his mask slipped. Just a flicker of panic crossed his face before he pulled it back together. "You don't understand," he said, stepping toward me. "It's not what you think." But it was. I saw it in his eyes. I backed away, my heart hammering. "Don't come near me." That night, I didn't sleep. I locked myself in the guest room and replayed everything in my head, every family dinner, every inside joke between Daniel and Elena that I had brushed off, every subtle glance I had dismissed. They thought they were clever. They thought I was blind. The next morning, I received a phone call that would change everything. It was from a law firm I barely recognized. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, almost detached. "Mrs. Carson, we're reaching out to inform you of your grandfather's passing. You are the sole beneficiary of his estate. There's a property, a garage, that now belongs to you." I nearly laughed out loud. My grandfather and I hadn't spoken in years. He was a ghost from my childhood, a man of secrets and shadows. I remembered him as stern, quiet, always scribbling in notebooks he never let anyone touch. And now, out of nowhere, he was leaving me a garage? At first, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke, a distraction from the implosion of my marriage. But the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. Why me? Why now? Later that evening, while Daniel pretended everything was fine and Elena's name burned in the back of my mind, I found myself holding the keys to that garage. Heavy cold, engraved with my grandfather's initials. I didn't know it then, but those keys would open more than just a set of doors. They would unlock a life I never imagined, one filled with danger, secrets, and truths buried so deep they could destroy everything. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something stir inside me. Not fear. Curiosity. The morning after the call from the law firm, I couldn't shake the image of those keys from my mind. They sat heavy in my pocket as I drove across town, Daniel's voice still echoing in my head from the night before. He had tried to explain. He had begged, pleaded, spun excuses so elaborate they almost sounded convincing, if I hadn't read the emails myself. He wanted me to believe Elena had roped him in, that he was just protecting me from the truth. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I left. The law firm had given me an address. It wasn't far, but it was a part of the city I rarely visited, an industrial stretch of warehouses, auto shops, and old brick buildings stained by time. I half expected the garage to be some crumbling ruin, a burden rather than an inheritance. When I pulled up, that's exactly what it looked like. A squat, windowless building with faded paint and a corrugated metal door, standing at the edge of a cracked asphalt lot. A hand-painted sign above the entrance barely clung to its bolts, Carson's Auto. My grandfather's name. I sat in the car for a long minute, staring at it, wondering why he had left this to me of all people. He had children, my father, my uncles, yet none of them inherited. Just me. Finally, I forced myself out of the car. The August sun beat down hard as I walked across the lot, the keys jingling in my hand. The lock on the door was old, but the key slid in perfectly, as though it had been waiting for me all this time. The door groaned as it rolled upward, and a wave of cool, stale air rushed out. Inside, the garage was dim, dust motes floating in the single beam of light that cut through a crack in the roof. Tools lined the walls. Wrenches, hammers, rows of meticulously labeled drawers. It smelled faintly of oil and leather, like time itself had stopped here. And in the center of the garage sat a car. Not just any car. A pristine, gleaming 1969 Mustang Fastback. Midnight blue, polished to perfection. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't make sense. My grandfather had never been a flashy man. He was practical, frugal, the kind of person who'd fix an old thing 100 times before buying something new. Yet here it was, a classic muscle car that looked like it belonged in a collector's showroom. I walked around it slowly, my hand brushing the smooth metal. That's when I noticed something odd. The passenger seat was slightly raised, as though it didn't sit flush with the frame. I tugged at it and click. It popped open, revealing a small compartment underneath. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. I froze, my pulse racing. My grandfather's handwriting was unmistakable, small, precise, almost military in its neatness. On the first page, in bold letters, was a phrase that made my knees buckle. For Tasha. Trust no one. I dropped onto the seat, the notebook trembling in my hands. My grandfather hadn't spoken to me in over a decade, yet here he was, reaching out from beyond the grave with words that pierced straight through me. I turned the page. The next entries weren't journal musings. They were records. Dates, names, places. Codes I couldn't decipher. References to companies I'd never heard of. Some entries were circled, underlined, annotated with arrows and exclamation marks. The deeper I read, the more unsettling it became. He hadn't just been a mechanic. My grandfather had been something else. And then I found a photograph tucked inside the back cover. It was black and white, worn at the edges. A younger version of him, standing in front of the very same Mustang. But he wasn't alone. 3 men in suits flanked him, and though I didn't recognize their faces, there was something about their posture, their sharp expressions, that screamed authority. Intelligence. Power. I slammed the notebook shut, my head spinning. I didn't know what kind of life my grandfather had lived, but it was nothing like the quiet, uneventful man I thought I remembered. And now, somehow, it was tied to me. The sound of a car horn startled me. I peered through the crack in the door and saw a black SUV idling across the street, its tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside. The hair on my neck stood up. I shoved the notebook back into the compartment, dropped the seat into place, and lowered the garage door until it clicked shut. My hands were slick with sweat as I leaned against the cool wall, trying to steady my breathing. Whoever they were watching. And I had the sinking feeling they weren't just curious neighbors. I didn't know it yet, but opening that garage door had set something in motion. Something my grandfather had planned for me long before I even realized I needed it. And now there was no going back. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph from my grandfather's notebook, the Mustang gleaming behind him, the 3 strangers at his side, all of them staring straight into the camera like they knew I'd be looking someday. And then there was the SUV. When I left the garage, it was gone. But the feeling lingered, a weight pressing down on my chest. Someone had been watching me. Maybe still was. By morning, I couldn't shake it. I sat at my kitchen table, the notebook laid out in front of me like contraband, the curtains drawn. Daniel had already left for work, or so he said. I didn't ask. I didn't want to see his face. The first page again, for Tasha. Trust no one. I traced the letters with my fingertip, wondering if my grandfather had known this moment would come, wondering if he'd met Daniel. Elena. My family. Or everyone. I flipped through slowly, this time forcing myself to study the entries. The handwriting was tight, mechanical, as though every stroke carried weight. Some pages were lists of names and phone numbers. Others were filled with strings of letters and numbers that looked like gibberish. Then I found one page where the ink was heavier, as though he had pressed harder into the paper. Carson line. 1972, ongoing. Documented corruption at highest levels. Hidden until rightful keeper emerges. The words chilled me. Documented corruption. Hidden. Rightful keeper. Was that me? I almost slammed the book shut again, but something told me not to. Instead, I flipped to the back, where more loose papers were tucked between the binding. Among them was a folded map, old, creased, with red X's marked in several places across the city. Next to some of the X's were initials. Others were circled in red, like targets. I didn't understand, but one thing was clear. My grandfather had been tracking something or someone for decades, and now the trail was in my hands. I jumped at the sound of the front door opening. My heart raced until I saw Daniel walk in, loosening his tie. His eyes flicked to the table, to the notebook I hadn't had time to hide. "What's that?" he asked casually, but his voice carried an edge that made me want to recoil. "Nothing," I said too quickly, sliding my hand over it. His gaze sharpened. "Doesn't look like nothing." Something in me snapped. "Don't," I hissed. "Don't you dare pretend like we're still whatever we were. I know about you and Elena. I know everything." For a moment, the mask slipped again. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared. But instead of fighting, he let out a slow, calculated breath. "Then you know you're safer not knowing the rest." The rest. I felt my blood run cold. He knew. He knew about the notebook, or at least what it contained. I stood up, clutching it to my chest. "Get out." His mouth twitched like he wanted to argue, but after a tense silence, he lifted his hands and backed away. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me trembling. By evening, I made a decision. I couldn't sit in that house with Daniel lurking, waiting for the next shoe to drop. I grabbed the notebook, shoved it into my bag, and drove back to the garage. The Mustang waited like a silent sentinel in the middle of the room. My grandfather's ghost seemed to linger in the air, urging me to look deeper. I opened the passenger seat again, placing the notebook back inside the hidden compartment. But as I did, I felt along the frame and realized there was more. Another latch. With a click, a second compartment popped open, revealing a small metal box. Inside was an envelope with my name written in bold, steady ink. I tore it open with shaking fingers. "Tasha," it read. "Asterisk, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the time has come. You must decide what kind of life you want. One built on lies, or one lived in truth. What I've left you will put you in danger, but it will also set you free. Trust no one, not Daniel, not Elena, not even those who share your blood. You are stronger than you know. Follow the evidence. Finish what I could not." My chest tightened as tears blurred my vision. My grandfather, who had been silent my whole life, believed in me enough to entrust me with this. The letter ended with a single line, underlined twice. "Start with the first X." I unfolded the map again, my eyes landing on the nearest red X just a few miles from the garage. The SUV might still be out there. Daniel might be watching me. Elena might already suspect I knew. But none of that mattered anymore. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I had to do. I drove with the map on the passenger seat, the paper trembling every time the air from the vent caught it. My knuckles were white around the steering wheel. The city outside my window blurred. Neon signs, rows of dark houses, the occasional pedestrian wrapped in their own world. But I wasn't in my world anymore. I was in his. My grandfather's. The first X on the map was marked in a neighborhood I barely knew. Old industrial grounds near the river, a place most people avoided after dark. My headlights swept across abandoned warehouses, their broken windows staring back like hollow eyes. I parked 2 blocks away. My heart hammered as I checked the rearview mirror. No black SUV. At least not yet. With the map clutched in my hand, I walked fast, my breath fogging in the cool night air. The streetlights here flickered, casting everything in a sickly orange glow. Rats scattered across the cracked pavement as I approached the building marked with the X. It was a storage unit, rusted metal door, weeds crawling up its sides. A number stenciled above, 43. I swallowed hard. The keyring my grandfather had left had at least half a dozen keys. I tried the first. No luck. The second slipped in perfectly. The lock clicked, and the door screeched as I pushed it upward. Inside, the unit was pitch dark. I fumbled for my phone, switching on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut across stacks of boxes, dozens of them, lined neatly along the walls. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust, the smell of old cardboard and something faintly chemical. My pulse quickened as I shined the light on the first box. It was labeled in black marker, Carson Line, 1981. Carson Line. The same phrase I'd read in the notebook. Hands shaking, I ripped the lid off. Inside were folders, each one stuffed with documents. Bank records, receipts, photographs, names and faces of people I didn't recognize. But one detail jumped out immediately. Many of the files had the same company logo stamped in the corner, Nova Holdings. The name meant nothing to me, but it was everywhere. On contracts, on checks, on envelopes of cash photographed like evidence. I reached deeper into the box and pulled out a manila folder marked confidential. Inside was a series of surveillance photos. Men in suits meeting in back rooms, handshakes over briefcases, papers exchanged in alleyways. The faces were grainy but unsettlingly familiar. I froze when I recognized one. It was my father. Younger, sharper, but unmistakably him. Smiling as he shook hands with a man I didn't know. The date scribbled at the bottom read 1994. My knees went weak. My father had always played the role of moral authority, preaching honesty and loyalty while holding our family to impossible standards. But here he was, caught in whatever web my grandfather had been tracking. I stuffed the photo back into the folder, my stomach churning. A sudden noise behind me, a creak, like a footstep on gravel. I whipped around, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The doorway gaped open, the night beyond it silent. My breath came fast, shallow. Hello. My voice cracked in the stillness. Nothing. I edged toward the door, my every nerve on fire. The night air hit my face, sharp and cold. The street was empty, the shadows still. But I knew what I felt. Someone had been there. I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. My bag was heavy now, stuffed with one of the folders I dared to take. The rest would have to wait. On the drive home, every headlight in my rearview mirror made my heart stop. Every car that lingered too long behind me felt like the SUV from before. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my chest ached from the tension. I killed the engine, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, forcing myself to breathe. Inside, I set the folder on the kitchen table, staring at the photo of my father until the edges blurred. My grandfather hadn't been chasing shadows. He'd been documenting our family's sins. And now, that truth was mine to carry. But as I reached to close the folder, something caught my eye. Tucked into the back pocket was a flash drive. Small. Silver. Easily overlooked. I picked it up, the weight of it almost nothing, yet it felt like holding dynamite. What was on it? Why had my grandfather hidden it here? And most terrifying of all, why did I suddenly feel like someone out there already knew I had it? I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the folder spread out in front of me, the silver flash drive resting on top like a loaded gun. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. Trust no one. But if that was true, what was I supposed to do with this? I didn't trust Daniel. I didn't trust Elena. And after seeing that photo, I wasn't sure I could even trust my father anymore. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses on your ears until you're certain it's hiding something. Every creak in the floorboards made me flinch. Every gust of wind against the windows felt like someone was outside watching. Finally, I forced myself up and carried the flash drive to the small office at the back of the house. Daniel and I had bought the computer together a few years ago, but he rarely touched it. That, at least, gave me some comfort. I plugged the drive in. For a second, nothing. Then the screen blinked, and a folder appeared labeled simply, C-Line. My hands were slick with sweat as I clicked it open. Inside were dozens of subfolders, each with a year stamped on it, going back decades. I clicked on 1994, the same year as the photo I'd found. The folder was filled with documents, scanned images of contracts, bank transfers, memos stamped confidential. Most of it looked like gibberish to me, coded legal jargon and company seals I didn't recognize. But one name jumped out again and again: Nova Holdings. There it was, the same name from the boxes in the storage unit. I clicked on another folder, this one labeled 2005. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through file after file. This wasn't just shady business deals. These were government contracts, defense spending, multi-million-dollar transactions funneled through shell corporations, all tied back to Nova Holdings. And then I found it, a scanned letter signed by a board member. The name at the bottom was one I knew all too well. Elena Carson. My sister. I stared at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears. She hadn't just been helping Daniel launder money behind my back. She was part of it. Deeply, officially, maybe even leading it. I wanted to throw up. A sudden pop from the living room made me nearly fall out of the chair. My heart raced as I crept down the hall, a lamp cord clutched like a weapon. But it was just the heater kicking on, the pipes groaning like they always did. Still, the paranoia had me shaking. I unplugged the flash drive, shoving it into my pocket. I couldn't risk leaving it here. Not with Daniel still coming and going. Not with Elena somewhere out there, pulling strings I couldn't see. I needed help. But who? I thought about the letter my grandfather had written, the way he had insisted on secrecy. He hadn't trusted the system. He hadn't trusted the police. Maybe he'd been right. But I couldn't do this alone either. Then I remembered the last line of the folder I had opened, a scanned note, handwritten by my grandfather, attached to a file from 2010. If anything happens to me, contact our Marshal. Independent press. Knows the truth. Will protect you. Our Marshal. A journalist. It was the first breadcrumb that pointed outside the family, outside the mess. But even as I clung to it, doubt clawed at me. How could I know this person wasn't already compromised? The sound of a car engine outside snapped me out of my thoughts. I hurried to the window, peeking through the blinds. A black SUV sat idling at the curb. My breath caught. The same kind of SUV I'd seen near the garage. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't move. Just stood frozen watching, as the vehicle lingered for what felt like an eternity. Finally, it rolled away, disappearing down the street. But the message was clear. Whoever was behind this knew I was digging. I pressed my back to the wall, clutching the flash drive in my fist. I couldn't stay here anymore. Not in this house. Not with Daniel drifting in and out like a snake waiting for me to let my guard down. My grandfather hadn't just left me keys and a car. He'd left me a path. A map. A mission. And now, staring at the dark street outside, I knew one thing for certain. I had to keep moving. If I stopped, if I hesitated, I'd end up buried just like him.